I walked out of my own mother's retirement party before they served the main course. And the reason I left is something I still think about every time I see a white tablecloth. My mother spent 31 years working as a school custodian. Not a principal, not a teacher, a custodian. She buffed floors at Ridgeway Elementary in Akron, Ohio, from 6 in the morning until 2 in the afternoon, 5 days a week, for 3 decades. She raised me mostly on her own after my father left when I was 9. She packed my lunch every day until I was old enough to be embarrassed about it. She sat in the bleachers at every one of my baseball games in a folding lawn chair she brought from home because the wooden bleachers hurt her back. She never complained about any of it. Not once. Not in a way that was meant to make me feel guilty, anyway. When I was 26, I met my wife at a conference in Columbus. She was working in marketing for a mid-sized pharmaceutical company. Smart, sharp, the kind of woman who knew what she wanted and wasn't shy about saying so. I liked that about her immediately. We dated for 2 years, got engaged, married at a small ceremony in Cleveland with about 40 people. My mother cried. My wife's parents, her father, a corporate attorney, and her mother, who managed their household and a small event planning business, were polite. Warm enough. I didn't think much about it at the time. The first sign was small. It always is. About 3 months into our marriage, my wife's mother, I always called her by her first name Sylvia, though she never once asked me to, made a comment over dinner about how it must have been challenging growing up the way I did. She said it the way someone says challenging when they mean something else entirely. I let it go. My wife changed the subject. I told myself it was nothing. The second sign came at Thanksgiving. My mother drove up from Akron in her 2009 Civic. The car had a dent in the rear quarter panel that she'd been meaning to get fixed for 2 years. Sylvia looked at that car in the driveway in a way I can only describe as distressed. She didn't say anything, but I saw it. My mother brought a pecan pie she'd made from scratch. Sylvia put it on the counter and served a pie she'd ordered from a bakery in Shaker Heights instead. When my mother asked about our pie, Sylvia said there simply wasn't enough room on the table. There were 7 of us. The table seated 12. I said nothing. My wife said nothing. My mother smiled and said the bakery pie was delicious. I should have said something then. I know that now. The retirement party was my wife's idea, actually. That surprised me. My mother was turning 62 and leaving Ridgeway after 31 years, and my wife suggested we throw her a party. I was touched. We booked a private room at a restaurant called the Farrell House in Akron. A nicer place, not extravagant, but the kind of restaurant with real linen napkins and a wine list. My mother was nervous about it. She kept saying it was too much. I told her she deserved it. We invited about 30 people. My mother's coworkers from the school. Her neighbor Carol, who'd looked after me some afternoons when I was a kid. A few relatives. And my wife's parents, because they were family now, and I genuinely believed that meant something. My wife's father, a man named Philip, had been largely quiet through most of our relationship. He shook my hand firmly at the wedding and told me I seemed like a solid young man. That was the most he'd said to me directly in 3 years. He worked long hours. He wasn't unkind, he just wasn't warm. Sylvia did the talking for both of them. We got to the Farrell house early to set up. My mother arrived in a dress I'd never seen before. Navy blue, modest, clearly new. She'd gotten her hair done. She looked beautiful and a little nervous. The way she always looked when she thought people were going to make a fuss over her. The first hour was fine. People came in. My mother's coworkers hugged her and laughed about things that happened at the school over the years. Carol brought her a card with a $50 gift card to a garden center tucked inside, because my mother loved her backyard. Everything felt easy and warm and exactly right. Then Sylvia found me near the bar. She didn't come to me with conflict on her face. That's the thing about Sylvia. She always arrived smiling. She put her hand on my arm and said she needed to tell me something. I assumed it was a logistical thing, parking or seating or something about the menu. Instead, she leaned in and said, quietly, that she felt it was a little unfortunate that this kind of gathering was the best I could offer my mother. She said it as if she were doing me a favor, as if she'd noticed a stain on my shirt and was being kind enough to point it out before more people saw. I asked her what she meant. She said that for a woman of my professional standing, I'd been with a civil engineering firm for 8 years at that point, I was doing well. My mother deserved better than a party in a restaurant back room with, and I'm quoting her now, school janitors and potluck energy. I stood there for a moment. I want to be honest about what I felt in that moment because I think it matters. I didn't feel rage right away. I felt something quieter and colder. I felt the specific humiliation of realizing that the woman who called my wife every Sunday morning and told her she was proud of her had looked at my mother's coworkers and seen something disposable. I said, "Excuse me for a second," and I walked away. I found my wife near the windows. She was talking with one of her cousins who'd driven up from Canton. I waited. When the cousin moved away, I pulled my wife aside and told her exactly what her mother had said, word for word. My wife was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You know how she is. She doesn't mean it the way it sounds." I asked her what way it did mean. She said, "She just has high standards, you know that." That was when I understood something. Not for the first time maybe, but for the first time clearly. My wife had heard this language her whole life. She'd been marinated in it. The idea that certain people, certain jobs, certain cars, certain pies on Thanksgiving simply did not meet the standard. And she hadn't pushed back on it once in the years I'd known her. Not once. I excused myself. I went to the men's room and I stood at the sink with the water running, and I looked at myself in the mirror for a long time. Then I dried my hands and walked back out to the party. My mother was at a table with Carol and two of her former coworkers. She was laughing at something. She had her hand on Carol's arm the way she did when she was really laughing, the way that meant it was genuine. For a second I just stood there across the room and watched her. 31 years, 5:45 a.m. alarm clocks, sore knees, packed lunches, folding lawn chairs on the baseball field in November. Sylvia was standing near the dessert table with Philip, who was checking something on his phone. She wasn't looking at my mother. She was looking at the room the way someone looks at a room they've already assessed and dismissed. I walked over to Sylvia and Philip. I said their names. Philip looked up from his phone. I said, "I need you both to hear this, and I'm going to ask you to let me finish before you respond." Sylvia tilted her head slightly, still smiling. Still that practiced warmth. I said, "About 20 minutes ago you told me that this party had potluck energy, and that my mother deserved better from me. I'm going to ask you to think about what you actually said. The woman we are celebrating tonight woke up before sunrise for 31 years to clean a building so that other people's children had a safe, decent place to learn. She raised me alone. She gave me everything she had. Every single thing. And the people in this room who are laughing with her right now, the people you called school janitors, they showed up for her for 3 decades when she needed it. So what I'm telling you, right now, in front of my wife, is that you will not speak about my mother or her community that way. Not to me, not to my wife, not to anyone." Philip had put his phone in his pocket. Sylvia's smile had done something complicated. My wife was standing a few feet away. I don't know exactly when she'd walked over. She was looking at me. I said, "I love your daughter. I plan to spend my life with her. But I need you both to understand that my mother is not a footnote in my success story. She is the whole story. And if that's something you can't respect, then we have a serious problem." Philip said nothing. Sylvia said, "I see." I said, "I hope you do." Then I turned around and went back to my mother's table. I sat down across from Carol. Someone had put a glass of red wine in front of my empty seat. I picked it up and I said, "So what's so funny?" And my mother told me the story about the time one of the 4th grade teachers accidentally set off the fire alarm during a Valentine's Day party by trying to heat up fondue on a hot plate in her classroom, and everyone at the table lost it again. And I laughed until my eyes watered. I don't know exactly what was said between my wife and her parents after that. My wife was quiet on the drive home. She sat with her hands in her lap and looked out the window at the highway. I didn't push it that night. What came next happened slowly, the way most important things do. The Sunday calls between my wife and Sylvia got shorter. I noticed it without commenting on it. About 3 weeks after the party, my wife came home from a solo lunch with her mother and sat down at the kitchen table and just sat there for a while. I made coffee and set a cup in front of her and sat across from her. She said, "My mother told me she thinks I should have married someone from a more similar background." I didn't say anything, she said. I told her I didn't agree. I looked at her. She said, "I told her I thought she owed you an apology. And I told her I thought she owed your mother one too." I'm not going to pretend that fixed everything. It didn't. The months that followed involved long conversations, and some that weren't so much conversations as two people sitting in a room not talking. There were things my wife had never examined about how she'd grown up thinking about class and money, and what people's jobs said about them. And there were things I'd let slide for years because it was easier, because I loved her, and didn't want to make our life harder, because I kept thinking people would just eventually be decent. We went to a counselor for a while, not because we were falling apart, but because we both wanted to be honest with each other, and neither of us was great at it yet. Philip called me about 6 weeks after the party. I didn't expect it. He asked if I had time to talk. We were on the phone for about 40 minutes. He's not a man who apologizes easily. I think that's just who he is. But he said that he'd been thinking about what I said. He said he'd grown up in a household where his father was very focused on status, and that he'd inherited more of that than he'd like to admit. He said Sylvia had too, in different ways. It wasn't a perfect conversation, but it was a real one. That felt like something. The thing I keep coming back to, though, isn't any of that. It's what my mother said to me at the end of the retirement party, when the room was clearing out and Carol had already headed home, and the restaurant staff was starting to reset the tables around us. We were standing in the parking lot. She had her coat on and her purse over her arm, and she looked tired in the way she always looked after being around a lot of people. Not unhappy, just quieted. I walked her to her car, the dented Civic, still dented. I told her I was sorry if anything that night made her feel uncomfortable. She looked at me for a second, like she was trying to figure out what I meant. Then she shook her head slowly. She said, "Baby, I buffed floors. I didn't buff who I am." I stood there in the parking lot of the Farrell house in Akron, Ohio, and I thought about every morning she'd gotten up before the sun, every packed lunch, every lawn chair on a cold baseball field, every pecan pie she'd brought somewhere and been overlooked. I hugged her for a long time. She patted my back the way she has since I was small. She got in her car and pulled out of the lot, and I watched her taillights until they disappeared at the light on Exchange Street. My wife was waiting for me by our car. She'd watched the whole thing. When I got to her, she put her hand in mine without saying anything. We stood there for a moment in the cold. There's a lot I figured out too late in this story. But the one thing I didn't figure out too late was that the people who love you without conditions are the ones worth protecting. Not because of what they have, not because of what they've done or earned or accumulated, because of who they are when nobody's looking. My mother buffed floors for 31 years, and she didn't lose a single piece of herself doing it. That's more than most people manage.